Good evening, good afternoon, and good morning. I am pleased to welcome you to the York University Public Lecture Series of the Faculty of Education tonight. What would be a better occasion to talk about quality education, education for a sustainable future, global citizenship, than the globally and nationally recognized SDG Awareness Week, a collaboration of higher education to promote the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, or short SDGs. You're not quite sure yet what that exactly is and how that applies to you and education in general? You're in the right place to learn more tonight. A special welcome to our current and former students. Many teachers are joining us tonight from the Toronto, from the Peel, Halton, York District School Boards, and also from other school boards and other institutions throughout Ontario, Canada, and internationally. Thank you everyone for joining, and our special appreciation goes to those who are spending their off hours, their evening, or even stayed up during the night. Hello, Europeans. Thanks to your families for letting you go and giving up their time so you can be with us tonight. My name is Catherine Cole, and I'm the coordinator of York University's UNESCO Chair. It is my pleasure to moderate tonight's event. Before we begin, I'd like to share a couple of housekeeping reminders. Please note that this lecture is being recorded to be posted for the purposes of this program and will be made available afterwards for those who might not be able to attend tonight. It is also being simulcast via VoiceEd radio, and closed captioning is available. If you have any questions or comments, you can post them in the Q&A section of the Zoom webinar function at any point in time. For those of you who might not be familiar with our tradition, or those who are joining us from outside of Canada, at the beginning of a gathering, may it be in person or may it be virtual, we pay tribute to the caretakers of the lands that we are on. Therefore, I would like to start off tonight's virtual lecture with a land acknowledgement. As this event is virtual and we are not all gathered in the same space, I recognize that this land acknowledgement might not be for the territory that you are currently on. I would like to ask that if this is the case, you take the responsibility to acknowledge the traditional territory that you are on and its current treaty holders. As a member of the York University community, I recognize that many Indigenous nations have long-standing relationships with the territories upon which York University's campuses are located today. I acknowledge my presence on the traditional territory of many Indigenous nations. The area known as Toronto has been caretaken by the Anishinaabe nations, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, and the Huron-Wendat. It is now home to many First Nations, Inuit, and Métis communities. I acknowledge the current treaty holders, the Mississaugas of the First Nation. This territory is subject to the Dish with One Spoon, One Belt Covenant, an agreement to peaceably share and care for the Great Lakes region. It is now my pleasure to share the stage with our Dean of the Faculty of Education, Dr. Rob Savage, for his welcoming remarks. Rob joined York University in July 2021. Before that, he was head of department at University College London at the Institute of Education. And prior to that, he was a William Dawson Scholar at McGill University in Montreal. He has published over 120 book chapters, reviews, and research articles in leading journals in his field. He's a school-based psychologist and classroom teacher by training. And from these applied experiences maintains an interest in making schools effective learning places for all children. Thank you, Rob, for sharing your remarks.
Good evening. I'm Robert Savage, the Dean of the Faculty of Education here at York University, and it is my pleasure to extend a very warm welcome to everyone. Thank you for joining us this evening for the third event in our public lecture series entitled Educating Tomorrow's Unknowns, Sustainability Front and Centre. The talk will be delivered by Charles Hopkins, who holds the UNESCO Chair in Reorienting Education Towards Sustainability here at York University. This chair, established in 1999, was the first one in the world to focus on education for sustainable development, ESD, as an overarching concept and positioning sustainability as a purpose of education. Today, Hopkins coordinates two global ESD research networks, the International Network of Teacher Education Institutions and the Indigenous ESD. The first network is comprised of teacher education institutions spanning some 50 countries and focusing on enhancing ESD in pre-service and in-service teacher development. The second network, covering 40 countries, aims to embed ESD in curricula to improve the educational outcomes of Indigenous youth. Internationally, Hopkins has a long relationship with education and sustainability, chairing the writing and adoption processes of several UNESCO ESD declarations. An awarded educational leader with several honorary doctorates and professorships, Hopkins has lectured and presented papers in approximately 75 countries. He is also the co-director of the Asia Pacific Institute on ESD in Beijing, China. York University is internationally recognized for its commitment and contributions to addressing the SDGs. This is the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, through teaching, research, stewardship and partnership as outlined in the university-wide academic plan, which serves as a blueprint for action. York offers some 1,600 courses, including some here in the Faculty of Education, related to at least one of the SDGs, and funds groundbreaking research to advance York's contribution to the SDGs. York University was also ranked as one of the world's top 35 universities in impact for sustainable development. The renowned 2022 Times Higher Education Impact Ranking places York 3rd in Canada and 9th in the world for SDG 16, Peace, Justice and Strong Institutions, and 1st in Canada and 21st in the world for SDG 5, Gender Equality, demonstrating York's commitment to being an agent of positive change in a world facing a range of issues, including climate change, recovery from global pandemic, poverty, systemic inequality and political polarization. This is a timely connection. Tomorrow is International Women's Day. Tonight, Charles will share insights into how we can use ESD to achieve more sustainable futures for all. Charles asks us challenging questions relevant to all. How can we understand global issues and interconnectedness? How can we learn to live sustainably and ethically without the feeling of only giving up or cutting back? What does this mean for educators, parents and students? Are we to add more content to an already overcrowded curriculum? Charles Hopkins' presentation speaks not to the role of climate scientists and governments, but instead to the vital role of education in sustainability and of concrete ways for educators at all levels, education professionals, students and parents to understand the needs to become engaged participants and make the differences we all need.
Thank you very much, Rob, for your kind words. Rob is currently traveling, but took the time to record his remarks for us tonight. Thank you very much for that. And now, other than encouraging the audience to leave your comments and questions in the Q&A section of the Zoom webinar, I would like to hand it over to tonight's speaker, our UNESCO Chair, Charles Hopkins. And whenever you're ready, I'd like to say the floor is yours. Thanks, Charles.
Well, thank you very much, Catherine. First of all, let me begin by thanking our Dean, Rob Savage, for the kind introduction, and also, of course, for inviting me to be part of this lecture series. And thank you, Catherine, for your work moderating this evening, and my thanks to Alicia and Anderson for helping us to prepare for this event. It's interesting and appropriate that this evening's lecture is part of York's celebrations of SDG Awareness Week, as our lecture tonight highlights SDG 4 on education. SDG 4 strives to ensure inclusive and equitable quality education and to promote lifelong learning opportunities for all. Quite lofty, but it is certainly something that is needed. Now, the awareness of the SDGs, addressing global issues like climate change and other complex social, environmental, and economic injustices is certainly on the rise. I mean, I think many of you have seen the little pins, right? And we have from Germany, SDG Rubik Cube and so on. And my favorite, I was presented in China at a high school with SDG soccer ball and so on, which I thought was really, really nice. But beyond awareness being on the rise, the important thing is the world is all really increasingly taking action, not only on the global level, but equally importantly, at the local and the community level. As well, the world's education systems are themselves playing increasing roles in addressing these global crises. Now, this evening, I want to explore the importance of education at all levels, right? Engaging and preparing students to thrive in this anticipated and unknown future, but one that many have the perception that we were going to have to give up many of the standards of living that we've come to treasure and to, of course, enjoy. But for educators, it's how can we best prepare for the future that is really often now perceived with unease and dread, and rather than hopeful anticipation. Now, for 30 years, education has been perceived as crucial in achieving a more sustainable future. And tonight, I want to explore the past, the present, and delve into the future of that story. So let me begin by putting up some slides that I've prepared just to help me getting along with that story. The one expectation or hope of parents is for education to help prepare students for the future. But how can we anticipate the world into which they are going to graduate when things are changing so very, very rapidly? Now, each year, the World Economic Forum surveys globally to find the perceived global sustainability risks. And this year, they've released these findings that give us insight into aspects that our future children and students will likely inherit. And here is a chart that I would like to share with you with this year's report that has just been released. Now, if we see the chart is divided in two. On the left, it talks about what are the perceptions that people have as to what are the sustainability risks 2 years out, now and up to 2 years. And on the other chart, it talks about the ones that will be more like 10 years out, when our students will be graduating or moving in there. Now, just for the color code, the environmental ones are green, the red are social issues, the purples are technological issues, and geopolitical being orange. Now, for those who are on the radio, let me just describe a moment. 2 years out, it seems as though the big issue is the cost of living and poverty striking, the collapse, loss of housing, that sort of thing. But the second big thing now is natural disasters. This is an environmental kind of issue, where the first one was a social economic issue. The third one is geoeconomic confrontations, and which is much more of a geopolitical aspect, climate change, It's already affecting us. It's on, and this is an environmental issue. And of course, the fifth one is the erosion of social cohesion. So these are the big issues that are out there now. But 10 years out on the horizon, I must say, the big issues appear, the first four of these 10 are all environmental. The fifth one is a social issue. But the top issues that seem to be coming, the first one is our failure to mitigate or reduce the impact of climate change. And the second one is our failure to adapt to climate change. The third being natural disasters. The fourth being biodiversity loss, and every year things are getting much worse. And the fifth one is large-scale involuntary migration. Right? So these are the kinds of issues that are out there. And we, of course, wonder, is there a role for education, right? In preparing people in anticipation of the kind of world that are going out there. And I would like to make some comments on that as we go through. Now, the big scheme that, of course, we're all pretty aware of, the way in which the world is trying to work together collaboratively in an overarching model to move forward, is what we've come up with is sustainable development. It was the best that we could come up with when in the 1980s we could see there was a clash between the development, the race to address the abject poverty, especially in the colonies that had been abandoned and were now called developing countries, right? So the need to address poverty and the hard situations they were in, but at the same time, look at the environmental integrity and the ability of the planet. And so after 2 years of traveling the world, the Prime Minister of Norway, Gro Harlem Brundtland, with a commission, traveled the world. I had the privilege of presenting to them in Ottawa in 1986. But in 1987, they came back with their idea of, okay, yes, we must have development, but let's make it sustainable, right? Let's make the development whatever it is. And so the concept that could be agreed upon by the world leaders was the definition from Brundtland was a development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to be able to meet their own needs as well. Kind of complex, but I like the idea of the definition of an African elder that I heard in 2002 in Johannesburg. His definition was simple. It was enough for all forever. Enough for all forever. And the whole concept, you can have that discussion with anybody of any age. What is enough? Right? And being Indigenous, when he said for all, he was not just talking about his tribe or the people of South Africa or people. Right? He was talking about all living beings, and then the intergenerational responsibility in the word forever. Now, in a Northern context, I think that enough kind of things of things or of stuff. And so I would much rather go along with the concept of well-being for all forever, and where well-being is not simply well off. Right? I may have time to come back and talk a little bit more about this whole thing of well-being that we're pursuing. Now, this is a long journey, and I just wanted to briefly put things in perspective as we're trying to look at the SDG Awareness Week. First, and the role of education that has strung right through it. So if we look in the very beginning, where we're trying to look at global collaboration, the formation of the United Nations, one of the very first agencies or organizations that they created in Paris was UNESCO, the United Nations Education, Scientific and Cultural Organization, for it was believed that war was created in the minds of men, and therefore it was in the minds of men that it must be perceived to prevent it. But in 1987, after 2 years of traveling the world, and we came back with the acceptance in Japan of well, it was a global meeting in Japan of the concept of sustainable development. And then for the next 5 years, it's one thing I agree, oh yeah, we'll have sustainable development, but what are we going to do, right? So for the next 5 years, there were tremendous negotiations going all around the world as to come up with an implementation plan. The plan that was agreed upon in 1992 in Rio was called Agenda 21, or the Agenda for the 21st Century. 40 chapters, and one of them, I had again the pleasure of being one of the 10 authors, was on education, public awareness, and training, which we perceived and was the only one that was adopted at Rio with really almost no discussion. It was unanimous. Yes, we have to have that. Interestingly enough, at the same time at Rio, there were 4 conventions. The one that everyone knows about is the Convention on Climate Change, or COP, right? And that was a parallel process that keeps going on. There is another COP on biodiversity, and one on desertification, and another one on forestries, but these are separate and moving along. Now, with the turn of the millennium, we come up with a sequel implementation plan to rejuvenate things, and we moved from 40 topics down to 8. And these were the Millennium Development Goals, and they were to run for 15 years. And so they did, but education again was a key one of the 8. Now, in getting ready, because we knew that the first negotiations were 5 years, from 87 to 92, they started the negotiations again in 2012 with a program called The World We Want. And countries all around the world, there were hundreds of thousands of discussions and suggestions came in that were gradually boiled down and became what was known now as the 2030 Agenda. And at the heart of that are the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. So that's just the sequel, and these will run for 15 years to until 2030. But probably in 3 or 4 years, we'll start the negotiations again for what will go from 2030, likely to 2050. Just some tweaks or changes from those 8 Millennium Development Goals up to 17. They're organized in what we call the 5 Ps. Those used to be, remember, social, environmental, and economic. Well, the social became people, economic became prosperity, and of course, the environment became planet. But to that, 2 important things. One is the quest for peace. Right? How do we bring peace into this? And not just peace at the international level. We realize that we need peace at the local, the community, and within the inner person, bringing peace. Okay? And as well, we realize that this isn't something just for countries, right, to negotiate and so on as part of trade packages. No, this is something that we all must get involved in. The other big thing that was different is that this is for all countries, not just the least developing countries. So the idea of bringing in the private sector, academia, and faith-based groups, all of these all have a role to play. The one thing about the 17 goals, the 17th one being partnership, is the idea that while they have individual titles, they really are to be seen as interwoven, complex. They all work with one another. You have to think of I love the idea of a quilt, a patchwork quilt. So one patch, yes, but really you want the whole quilt to be working. Right? So if we look at each of the goals in a little more depth, so this Sustainable Development Goal 4, you'll see that each goal has targets, and the targets also have indicators and so on. Now, the targets for education in a sustainability context, there are 7, but the first 6 are sort of what we're already working at, what we're already doing. So pretty well everyone is engaged in working on the Sustainable Development Goals. That first target of complete, free, quality primary and secondary education. But where we need the discussion is what constitutes quality. And does that vary from society to society, from country to country? And that's why every country, and in our case, every province, has control sort of over its own education. The second one being access to early childhood care. And the fourth, skills for employment and entrepreneurship. But what is different is the 7th one, where it is highlighted that everyone must have knowledge and skills for sustainable development. Now, each of these targets are fleshed out. So if we look at target 4.7, it states that by 2030, ensure all learners acquire knowledge and skills needed to promote sustainable development. That's meaning implement it, right? Including through education for sustainable development. And then it talks about sustainable life, and it also highlights global citizenship education. So that's really what I now want to talk a little bit more about it. So, but what is really interesting is just as at Rio in 1992, where education not only had its own chapter, but was embedded across all 40 chapters, sometimes not the word education, but it would be understanding, knowledge, research, etc. ESD on 3 occasions at the United Nations General Assembly in 2017, 19, again in 21, has been stated as the key enabler of all the Sustainable Development Goals. All of the goals have a component within it. So if we look at what really is education for sustainable development, we have 4 things. I said when we were trying, the 10 of us, we met several times in that negotiation period from 87 to 92, trying to look at what was really needed. And a story that I'll never get out of my mind. One of us was the president of Princeton University, and he was making the point that really what we desperately needed was better understanding of recycling, the knowledge, the skills, and for recycling. And the dean of the Faculty of Education, the University of Cairo, he said, I have several 100,000 children living in the dumps of Cairo who are excellent at recycling. What they really need is an education. And that really shifted our whole perspective, and we started really thinking about it. And so we came up with 4 big areas to work on. And that first one was recognizing that everyone must have an education. We needed education. Once the average education within a country gets above grade 4, population starts to come down. There's so much in the complexity of just access and retention in quality education. But we also acknowledged it was our most educated countries that were also creating some of the deepest ecological footprints and creating some of the greatest threats to a sustainable future. And so what we came up with was the second one was reorienting the purpose of education as it was now, reorienting from development to sustainable development. Tall order, and that's really what we're trying to work at now. The third one was recognizing we had to have the support of the general public. We needed public awareness and public understanding. We needed knowledgeable citizens practicing knowledge and knowledgeable consumers. There was just so much that we had to have in the general public. And the fourth one was where we do know how to do things better. Let's share the training and moving forward. So those are sort of the elements. But then when we start thinking about global citizenship, this was the idea of creating social cohesion. It was building solidarity, concern for the other, creating this sense of belonging that needed to be there. Understanding the social and cultural interdependency that parallel the interdependency of nature, but of humanity itself. And wanted to make it very clear that we're not giving up our Canadian citizenship or anything of that nature. No, it's a way of thinking about others. And I love to think it's not gaining a whole group of rights, but it's assuming a number of responsibilities, especially for others, right? So what we're doing is putting the two of them together. So on the education for sustainable development, really looking at knowledge and skills and understanding how the world works, etc., looking at it largely from the natural and physical sciences and so on, and building that in together with global citizenship education that is more about creating, coming from the social sciences, the creating of oneness and so on, but also a second part of it, giving people the skills to actually participate as a knowledgeable citizen. Right? Where do we get information? How do we process this? Does it make sense? And so on. The skills to influence people, to present your ideas, to become engaged in conversation. So you can see, bringing the two of them together, you have the head of the ESD, but you have the heart and the hands of global citizenship working together. So this is sort of the challenge that we're trying to work at. But all of this is a huge call. I mean, we're now in these discussions at the international and local level. It's calling really for transformation. Transformation on two levels. One, the transformation of the learner. Right? The second being the transformation of our education systems at all levels. It's interesting, they're proposing, UNESCO is proposing, and not only UNESCO, but OECD, sort of the corporate aspect, are looking at these stages. The first one, making sure that it is built on knowledge and information, right? Where do we get that, the true understanding? The second thing, though, is the critical analysis of the idea. Why is it the way it is? Who is benefiting from it? Why does it perpetuate? What could change that would solve the issue? What new problems would the solution bring? That kind of deep critical thinking. And you can see that's what our education systems already are calling for. The third one, though, is how do you build that social cohesion? And it's with exposure, engagement, involvement, that hands-on bit. And then the next one is going beyond empathy, actually building compassion. The more you know about either somebody or something, some issue or whatever, you build the relationship so that then in the fifth stage you act. Okay, it's moving on with knowledgeable action and taking forward. So these are really interesting components that are emerging at the time. Now, the system at the top levels are actually buying into it, and Canada, can affect higher education, but at the Canadian level, the Council of Ministers of Education, CMAC, have worked collaboratively across the provinces to come up with what we call transferable skills from grades 1 to 12. And there again, you have the critical thinking, problem solving, self-directed learning, and so on. But they also identify global citizenship and sustainability as one of the key transferable skills to bring in. Ontario Ministry of Education have adopted this, and that is to be embedded in across the curriculum as well. The EQAO in their writings and so on have put it there, and now the deans, the Association of Canadian Deans of Education, their statement is we recognize that our actions as faculties, colleges, schools, and departments of education are complicit in this critical trajectory. We have a responsibility and an opportunity to make a difference. So the wording, of course, the wording is out there, but of course, yes, are teachers ready? What has been put in to building? Now, we always have the early adopters. We've had teachers who are out there, and I would assume most of you who are tuning in there tonight, you're in that group of out at the front end, the point end of the stick, right? But globally, UNESCO, working with the Education International, which is like the global teacher union, held this big survey, 58,000 students or teachers from around the world. And they found that fewer than 40% of teachers surveyed are confident, for instance, in teaching about climate change, just don't have it yet. But 95% of teachers believe that it's important or very important to teach this, and over 80% wanted continuing learning to help them forward. The survey found that mostly how this was taught, whether they were the green ones of education for sustainable development, that is climate change and sustainable production and consumption, or they were more related to global citizenship education around human rights, gender equity, and or cultural diversity and toleration. They found that most of what was taught was the cognitive aspects, sort of the facts, and kind of shied away from behavior or socio-emotional aspects of teaching it. And they also found they had a difficult, the teachers said they didn't see it in the curriculum, not maybe in the preface, but not outlined really there in the curriculum. And they also pointed out how difficult it really was for assessment. When do you assess? At the end of the week, end of the year, later in life, all of these kinds of aspects. The second thing, beyond the teachers not being prepared, is the whole thing about the crowded curriculum. Where do we shoehorn this in? When I was a superintendent of curriculum with the Toronto Board of Education, every 2 weeks, there would be a group, an NGO, some parents, even the private sector, whatever, would come walking into my office with a binder and say, would you just put this into the curriculum? Now, on the one hand, they say, you've got 14 years, surely you can take, But the whole concept of all of the things, we call them adjectival educations, it just points out how inadequate, because if you look at them, they're all important, they're all useful. And it shows that just drilling on the basics and the core disciplines does not really prepare someone for life, right? So we, in trying to come up with what are we going to call this, in the years after 92, the next 2 years, I spent a fair bit of time in the House of UNESCO helping, and it was fascinating, as to what we were going to call it, because in the beginning we were just thinking about teaching about sustainable development, but we quickly came to the idea that it wasn't just about, we didn't have time for that. We want to teach for. All education is with purpose. So we head on. This is our education systems teaching for a sustainable future, right? And so we did not want to call it sustainability education, where it'd be lost in this group of 100. So it's called education for sustainable development, and it's applicable, of course, at every grade level. Now, as well, the third big deterrent that, as I traveled around meeting with ministers of education in different countries around the world in the work of my UNESCO chair, they would all say, oh, this is very important, it's very nice, but we're focusing on our PISA score. Now, for the parents who are out there, PISA is a program for international student assessments conducted by the Organization for Economic Cooperation and development. But it really tests countries on math, language, sometimes science. That's what the newspapers report. It goes deep in that, but it's always, where do we stand? Canada does very, very well, and up there. And the same with EQAO, the quality assessment and again, it's reading, math, and language skills in general. Now, these are skills. These are our tools. They're extremely important, okay? But they're not the purpose of education. Okay? We have to look at them. These are the skills, but they also need to know information from the adjectivals, right? But the purpose, what we're trying to do, is a way of embedding ESD and global citizenship into the curriculum as a purpose, overarching purpose of education. Now, in the research that we carried out in 18 countries around the world, we found that embedding ESD and GCED were wonderful ways of not only sharpening the tools, but giving the students a way of using them. So how do we build in math, language, and so on into the real operations? Now, we're not trying to change. I think it's also very important that the change is not all that profound. Okay? If we look at the top part, we're still saying that sort of the overall intent of education, is starting off with just having people enjoying learning, and then from there exploring what to learn, what all is out there, and so on, and then learning how to learn about what you want to learn, and then learning for purpose. The next step, however, though, is one that we don't do very well, and that's shifting the responsibility of learning from the teacher to the student. Right? How do we get our students to assume responsibility for their future, not only their future learning, but all aspects, but how learning fits into that, and then from there into the whole concept of lifelong learning. Now, in looking at what UNESCO does, is about every 25 years or so, they look at what is the purpose of education, and they bring together some brilliant minds, and they say, okay, what has changed in the last 25 years? So what should change in education? And we're going through one of those changes now. The previous one came out, the Dolores report, Learning, the Treasure Within, it was called. And but I hope to, just as an aside, I want to give, we'll give you some links as to where you can find some of these things that I'm referring to. And we'll send those out tomorrow in the near future. But the Dolores report in 1996, they said there are 4 basic things in purpose of education. One purpose is learning to know. And of course, that covers all kinds of content and the cognitive aspects and so on. He also said another one was learning to do, sort of the skills, aptitudes kind of thing. The third one was learning to be all one can. Right? And the fourth was learning to live together. Now, over these years, we're now in the context of the SDGs. In 2015, when this was brought forward, we started rethinking. And so the learning to know, we supplemented into that the awareness of what we don't know, the kinds of things that we're doing in the world where we really don't know the outcomes. And so that should be taken into consideration, just like doing things ethically. Right? And the whole thing to be is not just about you being, right? But to ensure equity for others to be as well. To move from education towards a social responsibility. And then the idea of to live together with others. In the context of the African elder, or others, yes, other cultures, other perspectives, but all life form, right? And to do it sustainably. Now, UNESCO is in the middle of coming out again with this exploration, the purpose of education, and asking huge questions. And you can become a part of all of this. This learning to become is a document brought forward where they look at it as learning as a social contract. Very, very, and then transforming education and learning how to transform, to question whose knowledge. You know, what is the role of traditional, ecological knowledge, and so on. So all of this now, and I'm trying to whip up fairly quickly. I wanted to talk a little bit about engaging with youth, because oftentimes students don't get much practice to be a citizen. Right? Suddenly they graduate, and now you're a citizen and assuming it all. But there's no gradual practice, time to think, and so on. So it's, how do we bring forward a knowledgeable student voice to develop this responsible citizenship? How, and a real part of education is discussing controversial issues, learning the skills of engaging in topics that are really relevant to their life, to deepen their understanding of the complexity of most issues, to listen to diverse perspectives, to measure them, to consider and think about them, share ideas, listen to their peers, and practice being open and respectful and so on. But also to go beyond that, to actually move to engage as students, sometimes in action. This is really huge in Europe at the moment. But of course, one has to look at it carefully. Is it age appropriate? You know, is it really education, or is it indoctrination? That's not where we're trying to go. We're trying to learn from the journey. And sometimes young people have brilliant ideas. Let me tell you a quick story. The handprint that is on the left is a story I'm so pleased with. In 2004, in Hyderabad, in India, a teacher was teaching about our ecological footprint. I think everyone sort of knows that. And the teacher had 4 balloons representing the 4 Earths we would need if everyone in India lived like we live in North America and so on. And a little girl said, but I have hands. I can do something about my footprints. And the teacher saw the power of that analogy. She went to the Center for Environmental Education, a large NGO in India, talked to them. They too recognized it and went on to the Ministry of Environment in India, and it is spread not only throughout India, Africa, goes through Europe and in many places in North America now. We talk about the ecological handprint. The power of it is the hope. We all have footprints. Everything we do has a footprint. But there is a way in which we can both reduce our footprint and enlarge our handprint. So if you're a university student and you're taking part in foreign exchange or foreign studies, foreign travel, and so on, yes, your flight will have a footprint. But the learning and what comes out of that in the rest of your life, make sure that the handprint makes it is there and avoid. Sometimes it's just a simple little thing of engaging, the idea of putting a controversial picture out, or just having the students discuss this. The idea of the pursuit of well-being, the importance of being able to cope with where you were born, your physical features, being able to cope with your station in life. So that's one aspect beyond the Maslowian needs you need for well-being. But on top of that, how your preparation for the world of work, how well you get along with colleagues, with other people. Is there meaningfulness in your life? All of these kinds of aspects of well-being that go beyond that whole idea of simply being well off. Now, one of the big things we try to do is making it relevant. How do we bring these global goals into a local context? So if we look at the environmental, or now the planet aspects, and start looking at housing, transportation, waste, and so on, and sewage treatment, or if we look at the social aspects, which we now call people, right? Issues around exclusion, access, equity, those kinds of social, there are many of that the students would put their own sort of twist to it. And there are economic ones, the prosperity ones of poverty, of how can we improve the infrastructure in our community? Or how do we even start small within our school? But the idea of localizing the issues is really important. Local sustainable development goals, and then at times they will relate to the bigger ones and come back down again. And the idea is also important is that we don't necessarily have to prevent everything. There are these 3 stages, the first being prevention. But as with climate change, we're not going to prevent it. What we need to do is to learn how to reduce the impact and where we can adapt. The adaptation is extremely important because the mitigation and the adaptation will be reflected in the economy of the future. These kinds of sustainability issues are not going to go away. Wish they were, but in the near future, they're not. So how are we going to build those right into the very economy of the country? Now, we do have some help from technology, and we need to be able to learn this. This one on the left is from Massachusetts Institute of Technology, and it is a whole series of different actions one can take, from increasing the taxes on gasoline to subsidizing other factors and so on. You can see there's a whole group of things, and you can play with the knobs and see what happens to temperature increase globally, and what are the different aspects of a fossil and carbon base that can be reduced. It's a really neat way of letting students sort of explore, figure out and come to their own conclusions, work on it. And then if they do come up with a solution, figure out how would one go about doing that. The one on the right is a new kind of, it's a word search program that builds on the idea that we are already doing a great deal. We just don't call it sustainable development or ESD and so on. It's a word search in course outlines and in our writings and so on that identify words that align wonderfully with the notion of sustainability. So I'm saying there are lots of things that are out there in the world of technology, but at the same time, understanding that we do have to become engaged. There is no simple technological fix that we're aware of yet. And I'd like to sort of close down with the importance of higher education. This is in a couple of different ways. We have higher education, although globally, it's a small percentage of people that graduate from university, maybe 7 or 8%. But they will become 70 or 80% of the people who will largely shape the world, either through politics, the private sector, faith-based leaders, in this way. So in the teachings of universities, we have a responsibility. If we know these are the shapers and we see the problem that is there, we need to do something, right? Even if it's criticizing the concept of sustainable development. It's the best we could come up with in 1987. But what is better? What can we do, okay? The second thing is through our research. The UN has identified these 9 areas that they really want higher education to be involved to do. We need much more in the way of further research. And our community service is so important. The whole thing around a communiversity, how can we do that? But also the idea of the university itself, not only in the 3 core areas of service, research, and teaching, but also in what we model, our HR, our operations, our purchasing, embedding sustainability right into the DNA of our whole institution. And this works in synergy. This isn't just about universities contributing. Universities get back the respect, the appreciation, and so on. And it aligns with the core culture of universities in this way. So all of these, the academic values that are there are reinforced in this kind of work. And so the idea then at York, where we do have the academic plan, where we are trying to embed the Sustainable Development Goals into all aspects of what we're doing, and schools. All of in Southern Ontario, so many of them are in not only looking at the environment through eco schools and so on, but looking at it in this broad sustainability aspect, looking at social justice and many of these other things. So, in closing, let me say, every little bit counts. Right? There's so much that we can do, and I thank you for being with us tonight, and hopefully you'll stay on for some of the discussion. But we all have handprints, and the thing is to join hands, work together, and let's get it done. Thank you. Back to you, Catherine.
Thank you so much. I'm busy with a smile posting the last link. I've been accompanying your lecture with a link, and I'm posting the Lazy Person's Guide to Saving the World, because even the slightest little action sometimes can make a difference. So thank you so very much for sharing your insights and most of our stories tonight. It's always nice to hear first from someone that is actually there. So
that's what comes with age, right? Many stories.
So actually know what happened behind the scenes. Much easier to remember afterwards than just reading the documents and trying to memorize everything. So there's a number of questions that came in, and we will also, and I want to acknowledge all the people that also sent questions in before the lecture, so we could pick some of the ideas up. And here's the first one that Jim shared with us. As we are struggling in translating those huge ideas into our real life experience, like what happens Tuesday at 10? What are concrete ideas in your view for schools to address sustainability? And also when we're looking at the SDGs that, like the quote, go across the departments and don't just address one discipline, but have a much broader meaning for schools and for universities.
Mm-hmm. Well, let me share just some experience of what I've seen. You know, I guess it's about 80 countries that I've rambled through, and so with your eyes open, you learn some things. One of the things is that we need to take some sort of leadership, either the principal or the president, whatever. We need we are going to do something. And then the second thing is to find out what is already going on and to celebrate it, say thank you, and engage those people who are already started in some sort of assessment. Engaging the simple one we always talked about is the traffic light. What do we need to stop doing? What should we continue doing? It's okay with caution, modify it, and so on. And what do we need to start doing? And then figuring out from that how can we develop a plan, sort of a long-term plan. What kind of resources can we get for it? And it's also important to hold people accountable, some tracking in the whole thing, and engage the students. Remember, the whole thing is, we're educators. It's about the learning process as we move forward. And slowly we watched the schools went early starting. I have a vegetarian Thursday if they have if you have a cafeteria or something. But to move from an event, a celebration, sometimes it's clubs and so on. But how do you get this into the DNA of the school over time, so that you end up with sort of a whole institution approach, whether it's a school, a university, or whatever it is. So those are sort of the key things that we're going on. but I think building on people's strengths. Everyone doesn't have to do everything. You know, some people, their real strength is more in the social sciences. It's more about engaging people. The things in sports that can be done with tag, being used to show how contagious diseases spread. So that's let me leave it at that. I do ramble at times.
Yeah, no, I like the idea of it sounds so simple, using the traffic light approach. And those are actually also the three questions that transforming education asked, like, what are we going to leave
That's
behind?
True. Yeah.
What are we going to keep doing, and what do we have to rethink? And I think the hardest part at times is, what can we really leave behind? Because it means for all of us, maybe having to change. If like, everyone has their hard projects, their hard activities. When it gets to those, everyone else should be giving them up, but I'm going to keep doing I think so those keywords: strength model, whole institution approach. I really like those. Another question that comes in is my heart project, the arts. Where do you think the arts can play a role, and how do we engage through the arts? What could be the specific role of the arts, which often have the tendency to be crossed out of the curriculum the furthest, because we're concentrating on core disciplines? So what's your view on that one? Thanks for the question.
Yeah. So important. And we have so many teachers that, you know, have expertise in this area. Some of the things that have moved me the most have been in the way of culture or the arts. I recall in Peru, in a small town where they were privatizing water, and someone had on a huge wall of a building, they painted it all black, and up there they painted a large tap, a water tap, but coming out of it were dollar signs, and everyone knew what that was. You know, you suddenly get the imagery there. Rap songs, you know, the whole idea of one that just struck me also in Lithuania. There was a big poster that was put up of a Russian tank, but the gun was stealing the Ukraine. It was turned and it was harvesting the Ukrainians' wheat. You know, it is stealing the wheat by the military. Those kinds of things. I think the idea with is picking a topic and having the students, first of all, just talk about how they are impacted by either a song, a visual, you know, a sculpture or something, and then trying to do something themselves, even if it is something as simple as a bumper sticker. You know, but the arts need to be respected and brought to the table in the same way as the social sciences will make it, whether we ever bring about the change, right? Every bit as important as the natural sciences. We need to blend together.
Yeah. No, I really like that. And during the SDGs, when we were negotiating the SDGs, we were so fighting for the piece of culture, because the culture is really what makes us human, what really distinguishes that. And that's my personal hope, that in the post-2030 agenda, that culture will play a much stronger role. We're getting, as you address emotions, and ESD also addresses the socio-emotional learning. We're getting all kinds of questions tonight on the social and emotional learning dimension. And where would you see, especially now after the pandemic, where would you place the importance of socio-emotional learning, also to create those compassionate human beings, that we're all those better human beings that we're all hoping for?
Oh, yeah, what a question. Yeah, we do have to have the facts and the knowledge and so on, but it's how do we embed that in the person, and how do we maintain that kind of engagement with the student? This is so important. There's a lot of very good research, and Catherine, when we send out the links, I would ask people to look into the documents on both the ESD and the one on global citizenship, because they're very, very good at describing the cognitive aspects, the socio-emotional and the behavioral aspects. And just looking at that, and then the teacher can put that into context, the situation that they're in. They, you know, are they working in special education? Are they in primary? Are they in university? Whatever. But just seeing that and adapting that to their own particular situation. There's a lot of good work out there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's particularly interesting because now that UNESCO has built on compassion, there are a lot of questions of compassion that we have trouble. We can create emotions for family, for people we're familiar with, but it's much harder to create that stranger compassion, to really care about the people on the other, like literally often on the other side of the earth. And building the emotions to wanting to do something about what they suffer from or what their issues are, especially the further it goes into the future, it seems to be that compassion goes really down. So I think the emotional learning, and I'm seeing a trend here tonight that many people are bringing up the socio-emotional learning, also early childhood. There's even, I have to throw this in, Fernanda, because you're also in one of our participants tonight asking about the DNA. There is more and more research about measuring compassion in brain activity. So there is this new field out there that is developing. Another question that I find very, very interesting here, that kind of builds on what you've said before, comes from Katrina. And she's asking, like, how can we make that point of importance in our institutions? And how can we, from the educator role, can we convince everyone in our university or college to pursue the SDGs holistically? And what shouldn't higher education in particular, be held more accountable?
Yeah. It's hard to hold higher education accountable, isn't it? You know, with academic freedom, and very difficult even to call a department meeting. Yeah, it's. I think with universities, with the rankings, you know, around the how much we're contributing to the Sustainable Development Goals, the impact rankings, and so on. Most universities are coming forward and saying, "Oh yes, we're doing this and we're doing this," which sets it up for accreditation. Are you really doing it? And so I think that leaders need to start thinking about how are we going to do this, and figuring out ways of engaging faculty that wish to become engaged. You know, that they can take some of the leadership, and then from there work its way back. There will be the next group, of course, the let it happens, and then there will be the small group of no way, and build on the no ways to respect it, and use them to come up with the critique and the critical thinking around sustainable development. You know, sustaining what and for whom? You know, all those things that we glossed over so that we could bring it in and work with it. But now it's time to really think about it more. But it's in an awful lot of policy and documents and people claiming it. So now it's time to hold administration to the fire, and it's time for colleagues to help administration. We do need to get this better. Otherwise we're shortchanging our students, and we're fraud.
Yeah. And it is kind of interesting, like I can only speak for the Greater Toronto area at this point, but there are an awful lot of institutions that do have an SDG strategy, from local NGOs, theaters in Toronto following a whole institution approach, the airport, Greater Toronto Airport Authority, all of these. It's nice to see when the SDGs, you showed the merchandising. It's so nice when the cubes pop up everywhere. Building on the ranking, Paul had a question tonight, wondering how you feel about the competition focus in education, with looking at the grades, and how do you feel about that? As we're trying to move away from an individual, my own achievement, I am my own priority, towards a more collectively oriented education system, which we terribly need to take more of a responsibility. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah. Well, I've always been a part of that. If you look at what the private sector is asking for, they continually talk about people who can work in teams. Mm-hmm. And work in multicultural teams, in intergenerational teams, to work in because almost everything in the real world is not done in a discipline. It's done in a phenomena. It's a situation, and so that's why Finland has really reduced teaching in the way of disciplines, but looking at phenomena, what is going on, and how do you understand it? How do you modify and change it? So the idea of collaboration. On the other hand, we also know that there is competition in the world, and whether you like it or not, students themselves intuitively understand where they are. Mm-hmm. There's, no matter what we try to do, there in any particular discipline at any particular time, there are robins and there are crows. There are those who are doing it, and the students are aware of it. So, but I think that as educators, we know that, and what we need to do is to address those who are crows in a way that is constructive, compassionate, meaningful, and accept that, and make sure that the whole classroom is accepting. The other thing about the ratings and rankings, I thought you were going to start with the university rankings and how I felt about that. So I'll just jump in and just say a couple of words. First of all, I think there are other ways of comparing, and what is it that we actually are comparing. But I must say that this has brought sustainability awareness right to the top, and in the sphere of universities, which, as I said, the disproportionate impact that university graduates have in shaping the world of the future. So whatever, I'm kind of glad that it is there. People are stepping up and doing it. The thing will be, what happens if your rankings start to drop, because we have far more universities entering into it. So how do the universities understand that, and are we in it for the long run? And can we move beyond playing the game of which targets are we going to go to try and tweak our, and look not at the goal, but look at the students. What do we owe them, and how do we embed sustainability across all 17 goals?
Yeah. And building on that, question from Sophia, a future teacher. Thanks, students, again, for joining us.
Good. Thanks for being here tonight.
Yeah. what can we do if we are within those education system? And she feels we could change one classroom at a time and create better knowledge and create that sense of quality education.
Yeah.
How do you feel? How do you react to that?
It's a beautiful question. You know, you're one of 85 million teachers. There are roughly 85 million teachers out there in the world. And if every one of them did something,
yeah,
think of the impact that it would be there. So, you know, when you get into your own classroom, we always, those of us who went in the beginning, we closed the door and we honed our skill, we developed our skill, and never forget what it is that you're trying to do in the future, and develop the skill where you'll be able to radiate, to influence others around you by showing what you're doing and watching the impact coming back from the students. You will be a change agent just by doing it, and eventually you'll have the skill to articulate what it is that you are doing and to influence beyond that. Thanks for the question. The individual handprint is important.
Yeah, 85 million teachers, and each one 30 kids. That's a lot of handprints.
That's right. Every year. Just do the math, as they say.
I hope it also Ratna had asked us to create hope for her students, or for their students, and joining us from Indonesia tonight in their morning.
Oh,
but I want to close, because whenever I talk to you, I am actually impressed after X number of decades in the field. You're one of the most positive people I actually know. And I want to close your lecture tonight with asking you, what gives you hope, and why are you hopeful for the future? I mean, in light of the current situation, it's so easy to say, oh gosh, everything is terrible, the world's going to go down. Why are you so hopeful?
I'm a possibilist. It is possible, you know. And if I look back in the 90s, where there was basically nothing, there was going on, and then in the Millennium Development Goals, the wealthy countries say, "Oh, that's for them." But now we're in a situation where not only is everyone being engaged, countries are volunteering national reports. The top echelon is saying we're going to do it. I honestly believe that at some point, a sustainable future will become part of the a purpose of education, and will be recognized that way. We're seeing the rise of school systems building on it. Teachers, there are honestly millions of teachers around the world who are working on this and feel really good about it, because they know they're doing the right thing. And there are NGOs that are supplying learning for a sustainable future, for instance, right here in Canada, in 1991, early in, and they're there supplying the kinds of things for beginning teachers and ongoing teachers to be able to do things. So I am an optimist, and I am a possibilist. I think it will be done. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And you're right. When you chaired the 2014 ESD declaration, it was to review the purpose. And now UNESCO in 2021 said sustainability is a purpose of education. Their higher education group actually said it. So there is proof for you to be hopeful, and there's reason to doing that.
True.
Thank you so much, Charles. And it was a pleasure talking to you. And again, thanks to everyone for joining us tonight. I deeply apologize. I still have 13 more questions to go and 5 that we didn't get to. We will try our very best to follow up with all of you, especially when it comes to our own students that we acknowledge that we're here tonight. We're going to pick up the conversation. And again, thanks to the team, Aisha and Anderson, for helping to organize and promoting the event tonight. And thanks to all of you for taking this time away from your families. So thank you for to your families and friends that were missing out on time with you. And we wish you all the best, and we hope to stay in touch. And for those who will celebrate tomorrow, I want to say Happy International Women's Day. Thank you again. Thank you, Charles, and have a lovely evening, respectively. Indonesia and Asia, have a wonderful day. And yeah, see you and hope to chat soon. Thanks.
Great. Good night.
The world needs more education, sciences, and culture to find sustainable solutions to the challenges of today. To build peace, combat climate change, and end extreme poverty, we must focus on innovation, creativity, and new ideas. We need to share knowledge so as to move forward. Every day, UNESCO trains and supports researchers, teachers, journalists, and artists to inform and educate, open our minds, and foster respect. Since 1945, UNESCO has acted as a laboratory of ideas, imagining tomorrow's world, building peace in the minds of men and women. Today, our mission is more relevant than ever, helping 260 million out-of-school children and young people get an education, and teaching skills to nearly 800 million adults worldwide, 2/3 of them women, who can neither read nor write. We need to act now to protect human rights and dignity. The United Nations has defined 17 goals to achieve sustainable development by 2030. To succeed, we must invest in the forces that drive sustainable change. Train 70 million new teachers and ensure everybody can receive quality education. Ensure the transmission of heritage to new generations and embrace cultural diversity, so that we may understand and respect one another. Defend freedom of expression and access to information. Strengthen scientific cooperation to protect our planet and its ocean. To achieve these pressing goals, we need to build bridges and stronger partnerships with governments, businesses, civil society, and citizens. Join us today in turning these goals into reality. Together, let's mobilize our collective intelligence and bring out the best in our shared humanity.